Negotiating Reality, where we explore how our civic, spiritual, and natural processes tethering us to reality are breaking down and what we might do about it. I'm Eric Heckler. Today, I'd like to invite you into our conversation I had with Matt Biggar, author of Connected to Place: Regenerating Nature, Communities, and Local Economies Through Systems Change. Matt is the founder and principal of Connected to Place, which is a strategy consulting firm. He has over 3 decades of experience facilitating systems change in communities and otherwise. So, I want to give you a little bit of a sneak preview of some of the key ideas and things that Matt and I talked about. So, early on in the conversation, Matt asks a really great question. Can I recognize native plants as easily as logos? So, just think about that for a moment, right? Can you? How well can you, right? It's such a simple question, but it really cuts to the heart of our profound disconnection. Like, how well do we really feel connected with the nature, with the communities, with the places that we actually inhabit? And Matt's key insight from this is really growing into this idea that we love and connect with what we know. So, right now, what we seem to really know are the products and services that are literally designed to capture our attention to pull more dollars. So, and this connection is very, very real, right? He offers some data about how we spend 80% of our lives in buildings, 5% in cars, and 8% in outdoors. And this has been, of course, a very recent development in human history. And so at the heart of this, Matt's diagnosis of the problem is that this disconnection to place, hence the core thesis, Connected to Place, is the name of the book and the kind of key thing we need to be working on. He frames this as a central facet that is really at the heart of all of these interrelated issues we're dealing with, like climate change, biodiversity loss, economic inequality, social division, and the like. But critically, this is not a conversation about despair. It actually is grounded in real world examples and offering a framework to help guide us through this. So, in the beginning, he tells us all about these amazing changes that are happening in Paris, which I'm just alluding to in brief. It's pretty cool. It's some pretty amazing stuff, and you'll hear about it soon enough. And he also then flags how he's seeing these patterns of these system change levers. So, this is related to shifting power, resetting culture, transforming land use, and leveraging interconnected systems as a way to kind of break down silos. And he doesn't just give up the Paris example. He talks about some of his own work. He also talks about the great work that's happening in Detroit, particularly on advancing food sovereignty. And he brought up this idea that there is a goal advanced by Black farmers in the area to really establish Detroit as having food sovereignty over their fruits and vegetables, which I just think is so cool. Or how half of metro cities in the United States could probably produce all of the food that they need within a 155-mile radius. And that could increase if we actually move towards a plant-based diet. Or even the idea of like cultivating true place-based identity where we really feel part of our culture. He brings up these really interesting examples of like oaks and what would it mean to re-engage with oaks. And just a little preview. I hope you listen to actually hear the depths of this. So with this, what I really loved about what this conversation was about was Matt's approach, which was both systemic and compassionate, right? On a systems level, he's naming how capitalism might actually just be an addiction problem for all of us. And at the same time, engaging with the deep compassion and recognizing that we're all navigating this and we're all trying to work through this. And so he very much holds the sort of both end dynamic of this both personal and systemic change as a sort of infinity loop that we need to be navigating together. Not only that, I was really grateful. Matt played through some of the what I originally called island sculpt, and now I'm starting to think of as island shape from episode 3. He played with it, and he was showing how this could actually be a valuable heuristic for thinking about place-based economics, from hyper-local gardening into organizing towards watersheds, food sheds, fiber sheds, and other sheds. And really flagging that these are not abstract ideas, but they're actually emerging realities on how to be living in right relationship and towards interdependence. And then last but not least, he was really flagging a critical importance of those who kind of take a network mindset. And so I don't want to get too much more because I want you to jump into this, but just to give you a preview of kind of like some of the great conversation we had. So with that, let's dive in. All right, welcome, Matt. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here with you, Eric. Thank you.
Cool. So let's start with how you opened your book because I really loved it. And honestly, someone that pays attention to climate and sustainability issues and stuff, I honestly didn't know how much changed in 10 years in Paris. And so you were flagging, closing 100 streets for motor vehicles, removing 50,000 parking spots, creating 800 miles of bike lanes. And by 2024, almost 3 to 1 more people were biking than driving in the city center. It was like, that's really cool. So it was like, I can imagine you started because that's a pretty hopeful starting point. But I'd love to like invite you to tell us more about that and kind of why you started your book with that sort of orientation.
Yeah, great. There are a few examples of such dramatic change, like within a decade, and so that's definitely why I started it. Just how it grabbed you, it grabbed me. As I learned more about the story, I had to find out more, and guess what? The story continues beyond the book. In just March of this year, Parisians voted to open about 500 more streets. And notice I used the word open, right? I think that is the thinking around a lot of this is yes, it's closed to cars, but it's open to people doing all sorts of other things and ways to
I
experience
love that.
streets and get around. Yeah, so opening 500 more streets was what they voted to do to all these things. And that includes removing 10% more of the parking and less car lanes. And then like the vision that they have embedded in this is 5 to 8 streets that are pedestrianized in each neighborhood in Paris. So they really, it really got into this transformation, and which I would call systems change in a lot of ways. It teaches us a ton. I mean, the fact that this amount of change is possible, as you mentioned, it's not just about the physical changes that have happened there, and we'll explore this more. But it's the impact it's had on people, the amount of cycling relative to car driving. There's a lot of other just how people are experiencing the nature and the communities in Paris are changing. The connections are stronger. But this doesn't happen. I think that the point, and I get into in the introduction of the book, but later in the book as well, it doesn't happen just by without real intention, right? Without a real sustained use of what I call the systems change levers, which we'll talk about,
Yeah.
and that that have been kind of derived from real world examples like Paris.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. And I mean, we're definitely going to get into all those frameworks and otherwise, but like maybe before we get into sort of even a bit more, I'd love to get what's something that as you studied this Paris example, what's something that really kind of surprised you? Of like, oh wow, that was something I wouldn't have guessed that would have worked, or something like that, or any other kind of variation of surprise that came for you from this.
Mayor Hidalgo, Anne Hidalgo is the one whose administration came in and has really led this change. And what one of the surprises is she was reelected in the middle of this.
Huh.
And I know in like a lot of American cities, when there's been changes attempted on streets, there's a lot of political backlash. Even here in San Francisco, there's a supervisor who recently lost, we can talk about that, recently lost his position, was actually recalled. And it had a lot to do with street transformation that had actually happened.
Uh,
So the fact is, I don't. This is a worthy of like an entire book to itself. Maybe someday I can actually do a case study. But there's definitely a buildup of power to support the mayor. I mean, this is a democratic election that put her back into office, put her in office originally, and there was a lot of advocates working very strongly on these changes, and were able to bring people along and see that this is something that they want to support. And once it was experienced, it's like, oh, we want more of this. We want more of this. So they got, I think they were able to integrate it into Parisians' lives enough that like this is good. We want it to continue. Let's go forth.
That's great. And it sort of feels reminiscent of your title of your book, right? Connected to place. And it sounds like there was enough people connected to this place and this sort of vision of what their place could become that they are supporting it. That's helpful. And I definitely want to get into okay, then how the heck do we learn about this in the US? Because it seems like we're in such a weird, different place. But we'll get to all of that. This is great.
Yes.
So with this, it's continuing, just kind of playing through this, like a key thing that in this podcast that I've been exploring is the ways in which we've been disconnected. And like I frame it as sort of like our civic, spiritual, and natural processes that tether us to reality are breaking down, and we're trying to figure out how to bring them back together, right? What you flagged particularly was you framed it as sort of an alienation from nature is basically that lack of connection to nature and community is really the thing that you flag as sort of undergirding a lot of this. You flag how you offered like we spend 87% of our lives in buildings, 5% in cars, and only 8% outdoors, right? it's really depressing, honestly, just to read it and to hear it, right? It was like, so yeah, just unpack that a little bit more. How did you come to that recognition? What does that mean for you as you kind of think about like taking part in this sort of helping us to better connect to these things and what that might mean for how we kind of grow into the future together?
Sure. Yeah, and I know you explored in some of your work and other episodes that this is this very small blip of human history. So much has transformed. And so those statistics you just threw out not that long ago in the arc of human history were the
Yeah,
total reverse.
total reverse.
Almost all the time was outdoors. And so, I'm not one who's gonna say that, that some of this change hasn't been beneficial to humans in terms of like our health and stability and so forth. But it's come at a huge cost, and I think that's what trying to draw lines between this disconnectedness and the bigger crisis we face is a part of this book and a part of the work I do, and I think there are many links to it. There's just a ton of parallel developments that have happened here, right? So on one level, we are facing these very serious interrelated crises: climate, of course, biodiversity loss, and then on the social side, economic side, the widening economic inequality, the widening social division that's been so politically exploited, especially in our country. And then at the same time, people not doing well. I mean, there's just study after study of anxiety and stress and depression and just this decline of well-being. And so I hope part of this is just like a change in consciousness. Like what are we doing here? How have we constructed society in such a way that it's doing this? But I think when it just comes down to, our bodies and minds ultimately can tell us a lot about how to get out of this,
Mm.
because it is this, something I think we all experience to one extent or another, where I talk about, like you mentioned, the disconnectedness to nature in daily life. There was just so much documentation about how that's changed. There was a recent big study that tried to document that human connection to nature is down 60% from over the course of the last 200 years, and get some really good insights around that. But then disconnection from community. I think Bowling Alone was a real seminal work by Robert Putnam 25 years ago, and it just kind of talked about the decline of civic life and you know bowling leagues, but also church and community centers and just activities. And so this has been a real retreat for sure, in-person community. But I also like add to a couple other layers of it that I think then start to speak more directly to the crises, is separation from people of different lived experience and how much like
Mm.
residential segregation's taken place, communities with very different resources, and this lack of understanding, when communities are exclusive and people aren't intersecting in daily life. We're not, if you're not riding the bus, so you're not getting out in public space, even if your community is not super diverse, there's still a lot of diversity there. Um, and then the final piece is all the things that we bring into our lives. Some of them are very much needs, some of them are more wants, but it's
Yeah.
certainly food and energy and consumer goods. And the fact that we have this global economy, and it's really hard to know the nature, the people, the communities that made it possible for you to have these sort of things.
Yeah.
And it comes, all these things come at a big cost to the environment in terms of emissions and resource use and so forth. So, I mean, to try to, it's a it can very, very long answer, but I think
Yeah.
the disconnectedness, is very much related to these crises in the ways I've talked about, but even at like a deeper level of, I like to think of, we love and protect what we know, right? We
Mm.
love and protect our family and our friends because we're with them, we know them, and that's not the case as much anymore with nature, with in-person community, with our food. And so this connection that we need to bring back into our lives, is our way out of these crises, in my view.
Yeah, I love that phrase. We love and connect with we love and protect what we know, right?
Yes.
And so it sounds like a key thing you're inviting us is how do we start to
Yeah.
rekindle and connect with those all those relationships that matter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know we tend, what's happened is there's there's either all these other pulling forces that have pulled us away from those connections in our daily life that we can talk about, but there's also the exclusion of things from our places that has happened, right? That
What
again,
do you mean
like
by
you
that one,
have,
the exclusion of places?
yeah, or sorry, did I say the exclusion of things from people's places? Well,
Oh,
particularly like, I mean, we're no longer like producing much food close by, right? So we're excluded.
oh,
But but it's also on it's also on the social front, right? Where, just the whole nature of all the history of redlining and zoning, and just saying that, this community is only, we're excluding human diversity from this community to our detriment. But those things have happened. So if there's less, a lot of things in life are pulling us away from our places, and there's
yeah.
also less in our places that is diverse and sustaining in what we need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe linking this a little bit, I know a key area that you, and I'm going to come back to this, a key thing that you particularly put your finger on is, the influence of corporate capitalism. So I want to come back to that. But I want to also just play with this a little bit, particularly the more we're talking, the more I'm kind of hearing other conversations I've had in this space. And I kind of want to bring some of that wisdom and orientation into here a little bit, even in this spot, right? So I can hear how important diversity is to you and also to, I imagine, to place, right? So like I'm thinking about particularly Rob Dunn, and when I was interviewing him and building on his books as an ecologist, in his one of his key books, he talks about the kind of the critical importance of diversity to create a stable ecosystem in an ecology. It's like healthy evolution requires a certain degree of health of diversity and resonance and all these different beings living together in a healthy mutualistic relationship, which was a key part of a second book that we talked about, called The Honey Guide. And so I'm hearing a lot of that kind of articulated here. And then I'm hearing here in the contrast, something also is coming to my mind as I'm hearing us talk out loud. And let me know if this resonates or not. I'm just trying to play connection, but it doesn't mean it is connected. So it's more playful space of this, right? I'm also now thinking about what I was hearing from Marsha Bjornerud as a geoscientist. And one of the key things she brought up is sort of Newtonian thinking versus Darwinian thinking. And what she was saying was not really Newton or Darwin, but more of like exemplars of people showing up with a different style of kind of how you know things, coming back to, you love what you know, right? Like she was very much framing a Newtonian form of science, which tends to be reductivism, is you're looking for those like Platonic ideals, right? These idealized and perfect forms, right? And like ultimately everything is to try to cut out all the variance until you find that ideal form, right? Versus Darwinian thinking is all about honoring people, place, time, and in particular having that long time trajectory. Like that was the big thing that she was really in. Like in her book was called Timefulness. It was all about how do you actually connect deeply with people, place, and time, and actually then be guided by that, right? And so it draws you into this sort of relationality and otherwise, right? And so to me, I'm sort of like, as I'm hearing you talk, what I'm wondering is I'd love to hear your kind of get into this of like, is there something here where it's almost like we have these wonderful ideals that we've set up, but that like we've almost idealized them so much that we've like turned them into weird like transactional things that tear us apart or something like that, right? Because it doesn't allow us to actually have that like, well, no, we're living beings, we're in relationship, we need to be constantly negotiating with each other, flowing, right, and all of that complexity, but we don't know how to do that. We have everything now functionally outsourced to, you know, some other place, some other corporation, some other group. And so there's very little, most of the things that we're reliant upon have been kind of idealized into these kind of corporate structures or other. And obviously I'm teeing up the corporate conversation, but I was sort of like, I was feeling this thing, this playfulness from where you were getting at with this sort of diversity one. I'd love to hear like, what are just your reactions? Like, do you feel like some of that wisdom from like geoscience and ecology is valuable to kind of bring into this conversation as we think about connecting to place, getting it more to the practical piece of what you're getting into?
Sure. Yeah, I know it's interesting to hear all that. And like if I understood correctly, like, definitely the like Darwinian side of we are with nature, we're evolving with nature, we're working with nature. I mean, I think
That's
it
it.
just
Yeah.
continually comes back
There's no
to
separation. Like we as humans,
no,
we are one of many species that we need to be living in
yes,
healthy relation, both with each other and with the rest of life. That's, I think, is the short summary. Yeah, you got nailed it. Good.
absolutely. Yeah. No. And nature is our guide. And we are, as you know, and I've heard you say too, we are nature, we're a part of nature, we depend on it, we impact it. all of these things. And we as a society have really lost who we are in that sense.
Yeah.
And you hear it, and yes, and the corporate narrative of what life is all about has taken precedence very rapidly.
Yeah. Let's
And
unpack that now. Yeah, like because that's a key
yeah,
part of your work and
yeah,
thinking, right? Like, so
yeah,
tell us about how like you're pointing a finger on corporate capitalism and particularly breeding this
right,
alienation, right? So just tell us more about that and like how you're
yeah,
thinking about that.
yeah. And it rests on a history that I couldn't include the book because it had to, had to be edited and more focused. But I
Oh, you
don't
can
like
unpack it a
to.
bit here if you want,
Yeah,
please.
yeah, we'll go back a little bit for sure. It is, I do like to preface that because I have so many friends and family who work in corporations, right? And I think everything we're going to talk about in this podcast, I talk about in the book, is not an indictment of anybody's choices. Is not saying that corporations are evil. We're looking at the system and how the system is creating certain outcomes and impacting people on the planet in certain ways. So it's really important to hold that first. And so when we look at, it's not, again, just corporations, it's built on a history of at least the last 500 years of colonialism and imperialism and the event, the start of trade and really how power dynamics inserted very quickly into trade about who had power and who didn't, and exploitation happened very quickly. The Barry Lopez writes about the rediscovery of North America, a very short book about Columbus's arrival to the islands off of what is now the United States, and talks not just about the dynamic of though it happened with genocide and forced labor and other things like that, which are certainly a part of the story, but also like very clear, like the decimation of the local landscape. Like the
Mm,
way he talks about it, just like it was just wiped clean, basically. Not much was left. So in that sense, like the place was pretty much destroyed. And so I think that's kind of the mentality that we've kept up with. And it sounds dramatic, but it's happened again and again. And so corporate capitalism has just kind of been built off of that. And we
mm,
know there's a lot of concentrated economic and political power there. We know that corporations more and more are global, and since the system is built on maximizing profit, right? Again, not an indictment. Let's just recognize that it is built on not just having a big profit, but every quarter it growing.
yeah.
And how do you do that? You can't, if you can't sell more, which I mean that you're trying to sell more, but you're also trying to bring down cost. And so, where can you find cheap nature and cheap labor? And that's, I think that explains the story of the outsourcing and the globalization of the global supply chain in so many different ways. And so, yeah, these have been very powerful forces to disconnect us, and then to kind of get us stuck in patterns of living too, right? And I think that's kind of where we can go with this a little bit too, is like what's happened here? Why not only do have corporations develop so much power, but like how so much power over how we live,
Yeah.
right? And I think digital society has really brought it to the surface in so many ways. In fact, I like to use this quote about from Maya McGinnis, who's an Atlantic writer.
Hmm.
Her article was "Capitalism's Addiction Problem,"
Mm,
and one of the things she just said is, "We're dismayed with how we're spending our days, but feel powerless to abandon our new bad habits." And
mm.
she's referring to things. I mean, from some other research, and other studies out there. We're spending. I guess a recent study said 144 times a day is how much the average American looks at their phone.
Wow.
4.5 hours a day on the phone, a quarter of our waking life, right? These are products. We know big tech and
Yeah.
all its affiliates are very much designed and capturing our attention. That is the commodity. And the same thing to a certain extent with cars and our cities and regions and so forth being built around the car, a very strong car culture narrative. Lots of power that these industries have to influence political decisions, to favor what they need. And so kind of I can go in different directions there, but what to bring like some focus to it and how it leads into like the framework I have in the book is to focus on how have corporations gain so much power over our lives and over society. And it is through certainly their exercise of power, but political and economic. We can talk a lot about market power, that's
Yeah.
which is big too. But power, culture, really having a dominant influence on the narrative around society and what's normal and what's cool and all that piece.
Yeah.
So power, culture, and then also land use. Definitely having land use built around the products and services that are being sold to us. And then the final piece, almost everything I say are in fours, and I hope that makes it, you know, the data kind of flowed into that mostly, but it also helps us to remember it. So in
Hmm.
addition to power, culture, and land use, it's also silos. So it's hard to tackle these problems when we're stuck in a silo. The focus in transportation, for example, is not going to be so much looking at different modes, but it's like, how do we make a better car? How do we make a cleaner car? How do we make a safer car, which aren't bad things, but it often limits where looking at other kind of solutions that might bring more connection back into our lives, like we've
Right.
been talking about.
Yeah, that's all. So you were just getting into, and yeah, definitely want to start moving into the solution space, right? So, but I think it's helpful to kind of articulate your theory of, okay, so what is the challenge, And
Hmm.
I want to try to reflect what I was hearing back to you to see if I was getting kind of your perspective on it and correct me if it's wrong. I'm not trying to add anything new at
Hmm.
this point. I'm truly just trying to reflect back. And
Hmm.
so what I was hearing from your orientation on this was really, okay, first you were starting continue saying, this is not necessarily, individual actors or even individual people or even individual corporations per se, right? It's not necessarily something wrong inherently with the idea of building a company.
Hmm.
um you know and instead, um it's much more about understanding sort of how, like, the corporatization of our economies, of our relationships, of our communities have been pulling us apart, right? And partially coming back to it, it sounded to me like there was a compassionate angle that you were looking at this, of sort of saying there is a reason, there is something that this is giving us, and it's basically, um, at least the perception we'd have is, if we don't have to be in relationship with other people and other relationships, and we don't necessarily need to know um, when, where, or how we're getting resources, we can turn something that might be another part of life or nature into a resource, a commodity, a thing, right? And by extension into an externality, And so it's sort of like that invention of the construct of an externality that then creates this separation. And what I'm picking up is sort of the corporate capitalism piece is sort of like probably one of the most critical manifestations of that sort of separation. And of course, there's lots of ways to think about it, but one I was picking up was that externality and then the exploitation and all the other sort of stuff. And then you're bringing it in terms of like the history of that with colonialism and indigenous genocide. Well, I don't know if you used that phrase, but that was
Hmm.
the space here, right? So is that right? Am I kind of picking up on the kind of your articulation of the problem? Because I want to then link, how does that link to your solution space? But am I getting that right from how you're articulating it? Or
Yeah,
did
no,
I add anything into it? Yeah.
right, right. Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I think it is, uh, you positioned it well in the sense of this is very systemic. And so we need to look at it from that perspective. And it's not going to be helpful to be blaming people and people are doing the best they can. I read someone talking, actually it's one of my, I'll recommend this resource later, but
Good.
it's around, right now a lot of young people getting into AI. I mean, that is a career path. That's where a lot of tons of money is flowing. And it's
So
like, it's
much.
hard to say like you shouldn't get into AI. I mean, I'm deeply concerned about it in all the ways we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But the advice was more, just don't go in blindly. Just don't go in thinking like there's not going to be downsides, and things, collateral damage to all of this. And I think, that's a healthy way to help people. Hopefully, eventually, we have systems that aren't all built around AI, and that, but right now, that's what the reality is.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you
Mhm,
honoring that, there's
mhm,
so much that can easily draw us in. And as you brought up, like the addiction as an exemplar of that, like, like there is a reason why these things are feeding, short dopamine shots, as two of us both with backgrounds in
mhm.
behavioral science, right? Like
Yes,
we can, I think we could both look with love and compassion on how, we can get drawn into these things and getting stuck. Yeah. So
for sure.
yeah, so with that, let's get into the solution space now.
Hmm.
Right? You were like saying, okay, well, so yeah, that's the big problem, right? But the antidote is place-based living and connecting, right? And the way in which nature can be helping us to reduce depression, anxiety, stress, connectivity, all that. So talk us through this. Like, how are you landing on, connecting to place
Hmm.
as the sort of like the glue that will help us to work through this moment or to flow or however you want to phrase it. Feel free to
Yeah.
restate that question if you'd like, even.
Right. Yeah. I hate to, I don't, I like to always leave room for, this is all me tapping into the wisdom of so many other people. I mean, that's my
I
book, right?
appreciate that. Yeah.
It's collective. But it's also led me to a very firm position that I don't see much other way if we really want to turn humanity in a better direction. If we don't get back and connected to our places, I feel pretty hopeless. But I'm also very hopeful because I think it resonates with folks. It's not, it's very hard. I come across and talk to folks who don't necessarily think about this a lot, right? And understandably, I don't have the same kind of job that I do or you do. But like immediately it's like, oh yeah, connection. I mean, connection. We know deeply that we need these connections. We know that they're lacking.
Yeah.
And so people encouragement and support to move in that direction is so much needed. But it does, I mean, I will start at the very foundational part, which really, this is about systems change, and we'll get into this more. But that also requires personal change. We're part of systems. So I do want to like explain how simple living connected to place can be, and then we'll get into like deeper layers of its complexity. But it's sitting on your front porch, just making time to do that. If you have something like that, or just going out in the front of your house. Maybe you have, even if you're in an apartment, you can grow some vegetables, or if you have a backyard or a front yard, these are ways to just start connecting to what's out with you, and reducing, you cited that time, increasing that 8% outdoor time a little bit, right? But then, how our time gets sucked into other things so much with the constraints we talked about. So a lot of folks are going to be in car dependent communities. It's not going to be easy to at least get around without a car at all. But that just goes to simple things like trip chaining, where okay, let me just be a little more thoughtful about my car trips, and as opposed to like running out for this time or that time, like let me combine my trips into one trip as much as I can. And I know it's a bigger challenge with families. I've raised kids. It's not all easy, but there's something that we can all do there. And social media, I picked this up from other podcast host recently, but he basically said, so I love this phrase, get in and get out. Just go in with like, all right, I know I want to see a couple of things, whatever it is, and then I'm going to get out. Easier said than done. But these are kind of just the ways to start to think about what is my relationship to place and how am I being pulled away from it? How can I grow it?
Hmm.
And one of the challenges, and I think it does relate to some of the other speakers too, is as far as like knowledge too. There's a knowledge piece to this. So we should each like we can challenge ourselves to learn something more about our place that we don't already know. And for me, like a lot of times comes down to just what are native plants?
Yeah.
What's the native
Right, Rob.
vegetation? What was grown here for millennia before we've changed a lot of it? And, how can I recognize native plants as much as I recognize corporate logos? That would be like a huge change for a lot of us. I'm still working on that. I don't, I'm not there, but I try to get there. But it's like it's starting. So we'll go into like some more aspects of it. But one other thing I want to add to it as a way to enter into place-based thinking is our identities, right? And so and really think about what's going on in our country right now. Certainly in the headlines and the news, who pay attention to it, it's so much political identity.
Right.
Clearly, it's Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, far right, far left, all these sort of things that are people identities becoming based on. And so let's work towards a place-based identity, because that goes back to like reality. We're talking about like who we are. We are people of place. We are people of a place, and to think about how and we'll look at different levels of this, but you can look at your neighborhood, your city, your region. There's so many ways to start to identify yourself in those ways, and then to try to reinforce that. Like if you decide I'm really just a resident of like this neighborhood, that is the center of what I am, well then if you can free up some time, if you can get less tech time, less car time, maybe you can spend a little bit of time like doing something in your neighborhood that would be very rewarding and would really nourish you as well as nourish your community. So I just, it's not about, we can talk also about like a living connected place is not about sacrifice. In behavioral science, I recognize fully in my dissertation I did years ago that it's self-interest. I mean, if we're asking people to change how they live, which is what this is, it has to align with self-interest. And I feel connected to place does, because it's where we're living in line with nature more.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you also bringing up that sort of invitation to know. Yeah, it's like it always bothers me. Like right, so I have a house. I'm lucky enough to have that, and I have my
Mm-hmm.
backyard, and the going up the I have a hill behind my house, and I'm literally looking at it right now, and it's like I know enough to know that almost everything on that hill is an invasive species. And it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like pains me. It's honestly like I actually went into like there was someone who actually does like indigenous gardening and whatnot to kind of
Mm-hmm.
replant the whole thing. And like like
Mm-hmm.
literally when we brought him out, he said I'd have to tear out this entire thing and start fresh to like get the mycelial network growing properly and stuff, because otherwise all these invasive species will just kill the native plants. And he's
Yeah.
like, it's possible, but it'll cost you $75,000. I was like, holy shit,
Right.
there it is. Okay. Wow. I don't have that.
No, right. That's
But
that's a big one. That's a hill that is it's a public space, or is
no,
it?
it's actually we do own it, but
Oh, it's part of your, yeah,
it's
yeah,
part
got
of
it.
our
Got it.
land. Yeah, that we
Yeah,
do
yeah.
own.
Okay. So you do have like the power of restoration, but it's a very financial big commitment that would be hard to make. Yep, got it.
Honestly, it's something that's in my
Yep.
heart. It's like I've
Yes.
been wanting if
Right.
one of the things I would spend my money on if I actually had that amount of money, more
Yes.
so than a lot of other things. And it's exactly because of this, right? It's
Yep,
this sense of
for
I
sure.
want to feel a connection. Like honestly, I look at this hill and I dream
Mm,
weird thoughts, you know? So one is
yes.
sort of like redesigning it, and this is the idea with this person of like
Right.
redesigning it to be a bit like Torrey pines, like
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
that's our native plants and flora and fauna of where I live, right? But then I
Right.
started thinking, well, we actually always have all this mist, and so I started looking into like mist collectors, so I could actually get
Mm,
water, because in that would be a critical part, because Torrey pines is on the ocean, we're just a little bit off the ocean, so it's like, how
mm,
do I get the water to build into that? And then I started thinking, well, actually, it's
mm,
a hill. I could actually then start thinking about water collections and then actually using this functionally as a battery source to start to get energy to be basically when I
mm-hmm.
have solar, and I have solar on my
Mm,
house. When I have
sure.
solar, I can pump the water up to the top, and then at night I
Yes.
can let it run down and like have a turbine functionally. And like I've been having all these crazy thoughts just
I
looking
love
at
it.
this hill. So it's like I
Yes.
don't know. I'm kind of bringing this up as a bit of a playful example, but I'm curious, like,
Sure.
is this kind of in the spirit of what you're getting at of like connecting to place or otherwise, or like each of us kind
Absolutely.
of find our own way of connecting to it, maybe,
Yeah.
so
Oh, it's a wonderful example. I love it, and I love how you thought about it. And I feel like you're going to make progress on that over time. I mean, it could just be starting with a small plot, right, and just going from there. And then, I know you do a lot of things, but maybe it sounds like there's a passion there. But it's the nourishment that you get from it.
yeah.
And it doesn't have to. Maybe it's there, maybe it's some other place. Like for example, I happen to live really blessed to be here in San Francisco, and I have a very large hill behind us. It's like 900 feet high. We're close to sea level.
Oh,
It's called Twin Peaks. It's kind of a popular tourist destination in San Francisco.
been
But
to
what
it.
you love about it is they have been doing tons of native plant restoration. Okay, so this is public land, so that the government is able to has found the resources to do it. And there's an effort to really bring in indigenous voices into it and to start to rediscover some of the history of Twin Peaks. It's kind of speculated that it was kind of like a hunting lookout space for the Ohlone, but there's not a lot known. And there's a road that was built across it, and now half of that road is open to people and closed to cars. So there's like this revitalization happening there. That's really beautiful. And so I guess I'd also say to you, like, yeah, doing it as an individual is kind of overwhelming. And it'd be a great conversation we could talk about more later because that kind of stuff excites me too. But the bottom line is it's almost like a spiritual connection to the place there. That's what I feel like on Twin Peaks. So I get to bike up there, and I call it my spiritual center, something that just
Beautiful.
pulls me there. It's an amazing, I mean, I'm blessed again to have it. But I think that exists everywhere we are. There's that connection that can pull us in.
Yeah, maybe just to play and like come back to like, okay, what does that mean here? You're exactly right. There actually is an association that I'm a member of called Friends of Rose Canyon. And
Hmm.
every year we basically rip out, like my son and my wife and I, we've gone and ripped out all of the, mustard seeds and all these other weird, interesting, honestly, they look kind of beautiful. They're like these interesting radish flowers. They
Yes.
honestly look nice, but they're totally invasive and they kill everything. So we're like ripping all these things out and planting, all
Hmm.
things are appropriate, particularly starting with live oaks as sort of an anchor species.
Hmm.
And like it's really
Yes.
been great to see over the years we've lived here because like it was originally just all, mustard
Right.
seed, these big yellow flowers.
Hmm.
And now literally you can start to see the original, like the native and indigenous landscape starting to come back. But it's been taking years upon years. Like every year we just go out, we rip out a certain section, we plant something else, and yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So I mean, that probably was also partially as like, oh, we can do it in Rose Canyon. Can I do that to my own house? Was like, nope. Not, but yeah. So, but and I love that you name that as a spiritual praxis because that is very much is my experience. It's like for me, I'm lucky enough to have Rose Canyon and then San Clemente Canyon. And I basically go on a run a few
Hmm.
times a week in these canyons. It's like one of my favorite places to go is very much a spiritual spot. It's this beautiful old oak. I honestly have no idea how old this tree is. It's just at least, 100, 200 years old. It is just an amazingly huge tree. And every
Hmm.
time I run by it, I stop and I pause and I give a prayer. And my
Hmm.
son and I affectionately call it Fangorn, from Lord of the Rings, right?
I love
Um,
it.
but yeah, anyway, so yeah, obviously I'm feeling you on the play space thing, but I just kind
Yeah.
of wanted to play and bring it to life a bit with like, what does that mean? And it sounds like a key part of
Hmm.
that is not just that sort of practicality of place, but really that spiritual connection to space,
Hmm.
like seeing the life around us as sacred and therefore treating it as such. Like, am I overgeneralizing or overstating
Oh
that?
no, no. I think it gets into this change of consciousness that is again society's pulling us so much in a different direction right now, and all the you are doing it in so many ways. I mean, I like to tell folks like living connected to place is something a lot of us practice in some ways. It's just not possible to do it as much as maybe we need to. And so, yeah, the participation in that with that canyon restoration sounds awesome. And this connection to what's there, and it's a constant journey for myself. I don't pretend to be uh, doing it all the time, but I definitely, I think gravitating in those directions is wonderful. That you brought up the oak trees,
Yeah.
which kind of I think it does get back to like larger society things because it connected me to a story I read and I reference in my book around restoration of oaks in Silicon Valley,
Ah,
right? So, we're in different parts of California, but at least not so much in San Francisco, but down on the peninsula, there's a lot of native oaks.
yeah.
And there's a lot of invasive eucalyptus trees that have been planted in the peninsula,
Everywhere.
and they're starting to die, probably in San Diego too.
That's what's on my
Um,
hill. The
yes,
damn eucalyptus. I see that. I'm
yep,
like,
yep. Well, they'll fall down eventually. Hopefully, they're not too close to your house.
yeah,
But
I'll be fine.
yeah, you'll be fine. But in this article, and it sprung a lot of thoughts for myself, but they did talk a little bit about like not just restoring oaks, but art related to oaks and cultural activities and gatherings related to oaks, the spiritual practice you talked about. And so it's how we make nature part of our human culture. And I just the possibilities are limitless. But you can just imagine, what if a community and city really embraced oak trees, and like everybody there just really felt it, and you saw it. That's a whole different kind of identity than the identities we've been pushed into as consume. Our identity, we're more pushed into being consumers, and
Yeah.
people have to get somewhere, and people have to be productive, and people have to align on a political party. It's
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah, so let's start getting into the sort of how you're thinking about that. The four systems change. You brought up shifting power, transforming land
Mhm.
use, resetting culture, leveraging systems together. And I want to get into those, but maybe just as a bit of a transition between this, I just want to note that, it seems like one of those is honestly just sort of what I'm hearing from this other one is, and maybe this is part of shifting, resetting culture, but just sort of like that opening your heart to
Mhm.
nature. It seems like a critical part of this, right? But talk us through how you've been thinking. How did you land on those sort of system change levers and otherwise, and growing out from that, and kind of what does that mean for us as we try to think about how to be connected to place?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think what we've been talking a lot about is relates to vision, relates to where do we want to point our systems. And
Hmm.
this part gets into more the head part, right? So,
Yeah,
and I like to think of my book as like the heart and the head. The connection to place is the heart.
yeah,
And but we live in a world that has been designed in certain ways that very much pull us again in a different direction. And so this is now my strategic planning hat, which I've been doing for most of my career, and
yeah.
working with
Let's do it.
collaboratives.
It's a both and, right? We need both.
Yeah, both hands. And
Yeah.
so I mentioned earlier, what you still, a systems change perspective is going to identify like what's holding our problems in place. What are the conditions that are like kind of producing actually and holding the problem in place? And
Hmm.
I talked about corporate capitalism's grip on power, culture, land use, and silos. So it's like, let's just flip that playbook. And there's really good wisdom from people like Buckminster Fuller who say, this is the existing reality. We may not have all the resources to fight the existing reality. I mean, are we gonna take it all down? But we can create a different model in its place and make that what pulls people into a different reality. And so that's the spirit of it. But we live in this world. And so, what are the four systems change levers to do that? Is to shift power, to reset culture, to transform land use, and to leverage other systems, which is also kind of translates into breaking down silos a lot. And so I'll give you, yeah, some examples
I would love
of
that. You
what
just read my
that's like.
mind. Like, give me some
Yeah,
examples of what all those
yeah,
would mean. So,
yeah, definitely. And it is, those words are carefully chosen, and so we can talk about that as well.
cool.
But we're just going to dip our toes into Paris since I've used that, and we already
Cool.
have that as an anchor. But then I also want to talk about food systems change in Detroit as a very different example.
Great.
And yeah, and so that the power, and I alluded to the mayor, got a lot of support, got reelected, willing to take on the status quo. So political leadership is valuable, but that you have to, there was a lot of people who built up power. So the shifting of power can be different things. Sometimes it can be like literally a policy that takes some economic power or some other power away from an entity like a corporation and places it with a different group. And I can give you I can give you examples of that. But this power we're talking about is really the building of collective power. So the shift is literally because there's now more power on the other side that's not aligned in the case of Paris with cars and streets as places for cars as much. And then the reset culture mechanisms are one that there's many of them, but one that I draw out, it does dovetail with land use, but it's literally one of Paris's biggest early investments was lots of bike share stations, lots of places
Mm.
for biking. And so that doesn't just make it easier to bike, it actually sends a message you can't avoid it. Like, oh, this is a place where you bike. It's like,
Mhm.
it's everywhere. This is clearly a place that values biking. So there's a cultural piece to it. And then the land use is kind of obvious in transportation. It's fun to play with in other systems where it may people don't often think about it, but this one is, clearly the changes on the streets are a lot of like the use of the streets is now different. And so when I say transform land use, but it can be very small. It can be
Mhm.
like It can be a curb extension that makes it easier for pedestrians to get across the street. And literally, the land use transformation is like this used to be a space for cars. Now it's a space for walking, right?
Mm.
It is a transformation, even though it's small. And I work on a lot of projects that kind of work at that level, but we tie it to these bigger visions of what it could be. But then another piece that's really important in Paris is leveraging other systems. Okay, so in the plan there, yeah, two-thirds of the repaving of street, sorry, two-thirds of the street change is repaving, but a third of it is greening, is plantings.
Mm.
Okay, so now there's a power part of it as well. You're bringing in folks who really care about urban nature, who care, you've got the nature groups, that just a lot of folks. It's not just the active transportation, bike, walking, transit folks. And so you're breaking down the systems to say we can create nature spaces and we can create transportation space. And to an extent, we're creating public spaces where more things can happen than just people moving around. And another aspect of that is, and this kind of gets into the 15-minute city piece a little bit, but there's been a big effort in Paris to increase local food. There's like the
Mm.
largest rooftop garden, like 3.5 acres, I believe, of food production, but also in like any vacant urban spaces. And so it's just like everything is like kind of shifting together in those sense. It's not just one thing. But let me talk about Detroit, which is more focused on the food change.
Yeah.
Um, and Detroit has had challenges economically over the last decade or two, and consequently had a lot of vacant space. And
Hmm.
so some folks got together, particularly a couple of groups. There's the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, and there's a Keep Growing Detroit nonprofit. They've kind of really developed a presence in the city and have brought a lot of people in. So they become a power source, and they have a vision that's pulled people in, which is for Detroit to become a food sovereign city for fruits and vegetables.
Oh, wow.
Yep, they've laid that out there. And the Black Farmer Land Fund has helped, at least as of like when I was looking at it, by 2022, it helped 70 farmers and farm businesses to buy vacant lots. And so the economic shift of like who owns this land and how do we distribute it. And then there's part of this Keep Growing Detroit has many aspects to it, but they help these gardens and farms with like seeds and vegetable transplants and other resources. So this is to me is all it's all building up like economic and power for people to actually make this happen. Um, and then on the cultural front, excuse me, um, that there's a shift of, among other things, because this is not just there's like always like the supply and demand, but on the supply side of actually growing the food, it's people thinking of themselves as farmers in a city.
Mhm.
And so Keep Growing Detroit, it really engages like thousands of residents in learning how to garden and farm. There's like a local youth program to teach youth how to work in urban agriculture and actually see it as a viable career.
Hmm.
And then the bottom line is like the land use transformation has really happened as a result. So now, and it may have grown, but there's 1,500 urban spaces that have become urban farms and community gardens. So 1,500 urban spaces, and there's a lot of space now devoted to farmers markets from these providing this local fruit and vegetables. Um, so that is another example of the systems change levers working together. And if just one systems change lever is not going to do a whole lot. It can help get things started. It's really these things working in concert together in a strategic ways.
That's great. And I love hearing those examples. And, maybe just a, particularly for those who aren't in this space, I think I want to name it too. So I'm very actively involved in a lot of this place-based work here in San
Mhm.
Diego and like part of a collective impact group called the San Diego County Childhood Obesity Initiative. We're doing a lot of community-centered and driven work that's kind of in this spirit. Um, and Also, another book that I really like that I teach in my design class is by Barbara Brown Wilson, and it's Resilience for All, Striving for Equity Through Community-Driven Design. And it's a bunch of case studies that are very much in the spirit of what Matt you were just describing, right? Some of them, but really like like one of them is like in Biloxi and supporting sort of like a bayou restoration project, or another one of like Cully, Portland, and the ways in which the community members there tried to cultivate and strengthen their local community without then getting gentrified, and how to do that delicate balancing act between all of these, right? And so I love that you're bringing this up and bringing it into this space, and then you're trying to build this and you're trying to offer this framework and principles to kind of continue to help guide, because it's like my sense is there is a lot of movement in this, but
Hmm.
almost by definition, it's fractured. you
Hmm.
know, because everybody's working in their own place and they're doing their own thing and they're building those strong local relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so it seems like part of this process is sort of like how do you honor that local place-based connection, but then also have that capacity of sort of sharing between communities of practice, not to tell anybody else what to do, but more of like, hey, we figured this out over here, maybe you can use that over there, that kind of thing. It seems like that might be a kind of part of the theory of change that you're working on here. Does that seem, I know I kind of extended that a little bit, but does that
Mhm.
seem a little bit in the spirit of what you're moving towards, like why you wrote the book and otherwise, or?
Yes, yes. I think the premise in a lot of ways of the book is that there's lots of positive changes happening, and there's just amazing work that's being done in communities and cities, but it's just not near enough. And so the point, there's not very many examples like Paris, in Detroit, in the sense of the food, where it's really kind of firing on all cylinders and it's connecting the dots, right? I think the two nonprofits I mentioned in Detroit have really brought a lot of people together, and they're working this synergistically.
Yeah.
But I think the norm is disconnectedness, the
It's fractured
silos,
place-based work still.
fracture. Yeah, I mean, to your point, I was at a recent discussion about kind of change in the Bay Area, and one thing that was brought up was this piece about more regional food and
Yeah.
and more local food. And we discovered in this conversation, like there's three different organization initiatives working on this, and most of us didn't know about them, and we're unsure they're connected in any way. And just imagine if those three came together
Right.
and said, "Let's do this together." It's nature's network. It's all about, how do we, how do you do your work really well, but link to everything else in this larger ecosystem.
Yeah, so maybe getting to this and moving into the sort of final key, well, not final key element, but like
Yeah.
another key element on these frame. Like this is I frame how I read it was sort of the four system change levers he brought up: shifting power, transforming land use, resetting culture, leveraging systems together. This is the what, so to speak, right? And
Uh-huh.
then the how
Yeah.
that I was hearing you pick up where all the word you used was catalysts, right? And so you
Yes.
already just named one, right? As sort of collaboration, right? And then a systems-oriented governance or government model, place-based education, and then personal change, right? And so let's
Mhm.
lean into those, but also let's start right where you just got brought up with that very concrete example in San Francisco of like, there's a lot of folks who are showing up in good faith, goodwill, good intentioned, and want to
Yep.
collaborate, and yet we don't, right? Like,
Mhm.
and so maybe just help us to understand like how, yeah, these catalysts sound right, but how, like, if this is the how, well, how do we actually do that in real
Yes.
world context and otherwise? Like, given that even you just brought up your own local example, like these three groups should totally be talking to each other, and yet
Right.
I don't know if they are, right? So help us
Yes.
unpack that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. No, we really do need a lot of people with what we call like a network mindset. That is, I mean, I think that these might be the most important people as we talk about this work, those who can kind of start to see the different things that are taking place, the different organizations, the different initiatives, and bring them together. And so in that spirit, though, is and I do, yeah, we'll talk about the systems change catalyst because you're right. Like we talked about like the vision, we started there, right? Which is
Yeah.
really important. Like what are we trying to do? And I
Yeah, that's
do
the big
think this,
why here, right?
the big why, yeah. And I think, yeah. And I did the vision again, of increasing the quality and quantity of connection in people's lives to me is like a very unifying vision. It's not climate action, it's not social justice. Those are things I believe in very strongly, but they don't necessarily build the big tent that we need. So I think we got to hold that there, and that can also inform collaboration because it may then lead to inviting more people to the table with diverse perspectives that can build something bigger, right?
Yeah.
And then yes, the what if say it gets a little tricky, but yeah, the what if systems change is the levers. You know, when we talk about systems change, what do we mean? And that's why I wrote. I mean, that's a big reason I wrote this book because it's very. I wrote it to demystify systems change. There's lots of great systems literature, but it's really hard to apply to like existing projects and initiatives. And I tested this out. I've worked with several groups, and I've learned so much from them. And that's how this framework came from both the research that I've done on the initiatives, like I shared, but also this real life. Like we're trying to work on a 1 year project to increase safe routes to school. How do we use the systems change levers? And so in that particular project, and most of the projects I work on, it's the first of the four systems change catalysts. Who's pulling the levers? How do we pull the levers, right? And so that's strategic. The first one, strategic collaboration. I'll just say the others, you've kind of referenced them, but the other systems-oriented government, we can, if we have time, we can talk about what that means more. Place-based education, and in multiple ways. And then we're back to a little bit like where we started, personal change,
Mhm.
right? And so just like if we're going to have systems change, if we really are going to sink into it, we've got to have that direction. We've got to have the four levers working, and we've got to have the four catalysts pulling those levers, right?
Yeah.
And so strategic collaboration is very challenging. I mean, I've been doing it for years, and I'm working on a new alliance right now, and it's still very challenging to get really well-intentioned people to work together on something and to
Yeah.
do it in a way that it feels like we're getting productive, right? And so that's why, like, I've written a chapter and I've done other stuff on like what is effective collaboration, because almost universal experience of collaboration is kind of negative.
Mm.
I just tell some people come into the room like, oh gosh, especially you're talking about community leaders, institutional leaders. They're just like, we've been on so many different things, and like, yeah, most of it just doesn't lead anywhere. I mean, particularly at the community level, there's a feeling of, their voice being invited into conversations again and again, and yet nothing really happening, no change really happening.
Yeah.
So I mean, we could talk for a long time about it, but I'll just kind of like
Well, you wrote
highlight.
a book, and just to name it, I mean, obviously this is partially like an
Yes.
invitation for folks to engage more deeply in your work. But the more you can help folks
Yep.
make it concrete, even maybe even like tell us a bit from your real life examples of
Yeah.
like how you were doing this, when like when
Right.
did a collaboration work, or and when does it fall apart, or anything like
Hmm.
that, to kind of maybe just lean in on collaboration, and we can kind of hold the other ones, knowing that we don't have infinite time. We can
Yes.
invite that, but like the
Yep.
collaboration feels like a really critical one. So like help us from your firsthand experience and knowledge, like what works and what doesn't work with collaboration for this type of
Absolutely.
systems change.
Yeah. So I think there's like three categories that are helpful, and then there's different things there, but definitely focus on relationships.
Hmm.
And when you say like what leads to things falling apart, it's almost always relationships. There's a break in trust. There's
Yeah.
a break in value for each other. And then the second piece is a common agenda. So it's like, just like we talked about, like overall systems change, having a direction that people really believe in, and they want to put themselves and their organization into. I like to work mostly at organizational level as a put, and it's not, when people come to the table, really like to be very intentional. You're not here just as an individual. You're here as someone who can go back to an organization and bring this back to your organization, and then your organization will keep taking things back here. So instantly we're making it bigger by just centering, not saying organizations are just here to talk. We're actually here to like do something together. And so that requires a common agenda that people feel really good about.
Hmm.
And that's the vision piece, but it's also a commitment to an approach, right? And so the approach, and what I'm arguing, is a systems change approach. And that's what I've been doing with the groups over at least the last few years, is like, okay, let's talk about how we can shift power, how we can reset culture, how we can transform land use, which is often, going to be a lot through government influence.
Right.
But there's not a lot of land that these groups typically control. But there are some interesting differences there. And then obviously the breaking of down silos is a big one, and it's resonated in a lot of different ways. And then the final, so that we've got the relationships and the common agenda, which is both the vision and an approach that we agree to. So we're kind of like, if we can get those foundations right, wow, the sky's the limit. That's a strong foundation that I'll try to build. It usually takes a series of meetings, right? And like, for example, the Streets Alliance that I've been helping work on in San Francisco is, we've been meeting for 8 months. It's just 2 or 3 hours a month, but that's what we've been building, what I just delineated. But
Yeah.
now the challenge, and you get a lot of different opinions on this. People have different approaches, but is like how we got to focus on implementation
Yeah.
and adaptation, right? And so there's components in that around alignment, around shared accountability, and around kind of our joint governance. So we've got to figure out, like, we've got to and so getting, and I'm one who's not terribly patient. I mean, honestly, I love doing research when I did it, but I'm too impatient for it. I have so
Totally
much
respect
gratitude.
that.
I have so much gratitude for you and all the wonderful academics that I know. I just, and so I do, when people are getting impatient, I'm kind of like particularly sensitive to
Let's
that.
do it.
But
Let's do something.
yes, let's do something. And so it's a balance. There's a tension between planning and action that has to be there. So you've got to like lean into the implementation kind of early on in small ways, but make sure you're setting up a really good process for that to happen. But I will drill. I think I can drill down on relationships just a little bit more, because without that, like, the whole
I feel
thing.
like coming back to the beginning, that's what our whole thing was
Yeah,
starting out. Sort of like
it
if you
was.
actually live in right relationship, right? It's very hard for these things to go. That's where the externalities, that's where the coming all the way back to your diagnosis, right? Of sort of
Yes.
that externality is basically a lack of relation, right? So yes,
Yeah,
let's lean into
it
the
is.
relationship more. I'm glad you're leaning into that's where I wanted to go to.
Great. Yeah, and I think this can be really interesting because I'm going to explain like kind of the network science behind relationships.
Cool.
And it makes me, given your body of work and conversations, it makes me think about where is nature a guide in these things? And I think
Yeah.
it is, but I haven't thought as much about that.
Let's come back to
So
that. Particularly, we'll come
yeah,
into Rob Dunn's orientations around mutualisms and whatnot. I think that might be a fun place to start exploring together with this. But we can come to that after we
great.
sit here with this relational part for your side and the network structure. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so I kind of referenced the trust and value in relationships, and there's an organization called Visible Network Labs that has presented a framework that I've found very useful. And they're a network science organization, and so they essentially delineate three factors that build trust among organizations and individuals, and three factors that build value. And so when trust is high and value is high, they actually have surveys. With some collaboratives, we've measured this, which is really interesting. I'm hoping someday to have like more funding to do this in a lot more depth with some collaboratives that are ready for it. But the three factors of trust, one is mission congruence, and that's kind of jargony, right? But it basically means we're in this room because we believe we have the same mission.
Yeah.
And when do these things fall apart? It's when a couple people are in the room because they have a different mission, and they're not, maybe I don't want to paint them too negatively, but they're kind of there to keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
It's almost like this is a competition, and I know these people are doing something, and I have a different goal, but I'm going to be here because I gotta, and I've literally seen that damage a collaborative severely. And then once that organization was gone, it was a whole different thing.
Yeah.
And so that's one. So we're in it. We're in it for the right reasons. We're in it together. The second one is open to discussion. Okay, so that now recognizes we have a lot of different perspectives. I
Yeah.
bring a whole different lived experience, a whole different professional background, and we have to really listen to those perspectives. And that will build trust, right? If people aren't willing, we know this. I mean, these are not things that we know. If
It's
someone in
not
your
rocket science, but it's easy to forget. And
it's
and
easy to
particularly if we
forget.
have cultural norms that don't really allow us to say, are we aligned? Are
Yep.
we, do we actually have a space where we can
Mhm.
talk through and have
Right.
a space to hold our disagreements so that we can work through them?
Yes.
Yeah, that's often not there. So I appreciate you
Mhm.
naming it.
Yep. And this is also why doing collaboratives can be so difficult because that requires time. And
Yeah.
those who want to get to action quickly, which it's you have to, it's always a balancing act, right? But
Yeah.
if we don't pay attention to this, it's not going to last. And then the third component is reliability, right? It's just simply I'm part of this collaborative. I'm getting things from it, but I'm going to give. Like you
Yeah.
articulate what I'm giving, and if you don't give it, that's going to break down trust pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
And I've worked in like so I mentioned like safe routes to school partnerships. I've worked on like helping bridge city and schools together and other things, and I've seen a lot of success because we've set up kind of structures like this. But when it's fallen apart, it's because one side just didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that's trust, mission congruence, open to discussion, and reliability. And then value is, I'm kind of valued for my role in this collaborative. And it's
Hmm.
interesting thing. It's level of involvement, right? So just being there and being involved. And I should say, you don't have to do all three things in value because organizations are limited in what they can do. Some can be more on the involvement side. The other factor is political influence.
Yeah.
And so again, that's certain organizations. You may not have as much time, but you've got political influence, and it's really important that you're at the table and you're valued for that. Others, it's just different resource contributions. It can be, I have a lot of data stuff that we can share, or facilitation, or whatever it might be, or community relations that we have that we can bring to the table. So getting those things right, and again, measuring those over time, I think, I mean, I hope, this is a message to like funders, and is like fund this kind of building and measuring. And it's not hard to do, but it just requires some focus. And then, yeah, so I do think about like, am I describing an ecosystem at the same time? Am I
Yeah.
describing nature?
Let's get into that, but maybe I want to just quickly link this as more of a consilience. So, sort of like different
Hmm.
perspectives coming towards a common conclusion. It's interesting, particularly your trust orientation. It sounded akin to the way a framework I picked up from Stacey Haynes, particularly in her book The Politics of Trauma, or if you look up Stacey Haynes online, I'll put it in for anyone who
Hmm.
wants to see this. But she defines trust as intentions plus capability plus reliability, which is
Hmm.
basically around mission congruence, right? Do we have the similar
Hmm.
intentionality? And you sort of ask that question. If you
Hmm.
are aligned on intentions, you start asking, okay, what are the set of capabilities that allow us to actually live into those intentions? And if we don't have that, we talk through it. We have open conversation, right? And you're
Hmm.
look, and then the last part is, okay, what is the systems and structures that allows us to be reliably capable of living into our intentions? And so you start asking the questions of basically, okay, maybe we're aligned on intentions, and maybe we actually know what the capabilities are, but we don't have any capacity to do this in any reliable fashion. And
Yeah.
that helps you then build a bit of a diagnostic on, okay, where is our trust breakdown happening and how do we work through it? And I've always loved that as a frame. I personally add good faith and goodwill to that as well, but that's a
Hmm.
whole other conversation.
Hmm.
But does that resonate with you? Kind of just like feel like aligned with what you're just getting at?
That's great to hear about that work. It fits so well. I think you just, I mean, it fits right into that framework. They talk to each other very, very well.
I think they do, and I love that because it's particularly coming from more of a social justice and a actually
Mm,
somatic care course, and particularly
mm,
it's really great work. I'm a huge fan of Stacey Haynes' work, so I've taken her
neat.
classes, I read her books and stuff. It was really good. But anyway, that was cool. So glad that resonated. Let's play, knowing that we're getting close to our end of time, and I'd love to just play
Mm,
with this idea. Like one of the key things, maybe just coming to this podcast is, I'm slowly trying to build out that, like coming back to that network logic.
mm,
That's partially what I'm trying to do is sort of in this space of negotiating reality. Part of that is to try to find those spots where different cultures and different places and different people might be using different words or forms or concepts, but they might have some degree of connectivity. And it's almost like, how do we do that sort of translation such that, oh, wait, that pattern, yeah, it took this very different form in this human system, but actually, we could learn a lot from ecology, or we can learn a lot from nature systems like geosciences, and like the beautiful dynamic between volcanism and erosion actually being perfectly in balance on our planet, which is insanely cool
mm,
and not well
mm,
known, and literally is required for us to live, right? It's like
mhm,
I've been trying to like create those connections to help us to really feel on many layers it's what it's you protect what you know, right? It's like if
Mhm.
you know that literally volcanism is required for you to live, maybe you'll want to love our Mother Earth a little bit more, kind of orientation. It's sort of where my head's been going at as one of many possible orientations for this, right? But now coming back to this, like particularly as I think about this, I think a lot about what you're describing in the work of Rob Dunn, which was summarized in episode 3. I called it
Mhm.
Island Sculpted. Now I'm changing it to Island Shaped after some peer review from Keith Bozzoli. So basically, this idea that we live in these layers of relationality. Now, we are both islands that have beings living within us, microbiome, and we live upon islands, right? Our cities and our bioregional areas and the continents, and then eventually Mother Earth as the largest planet, at least that we're in robustly relationally living with, right? Um,
Mhm.
so I would love to hear kind of, yeah, how I know you played and explored this, heard a little bit of Rob's interview, and you've also played this other. Like, what are those spots where you might be starting to notice some parallels and some lessons learned that we might be able to pull from ecology or otherwise?
Sure. No, it was fast. I love that work that he's done, and I want to learn more about it.
He's brilliant. It was such a
Mhm.
fit with him. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so I think right, there's so many perspectives and language, as you said, to describe what's going on, but there are these fundamental realities of who we are and being nature, right? And so I find place as a valuable way to make it concrete and as a way to restore things. And so indigenous wisdom comes into play a lot, ecology, of course, but also like economic thriving, right? The fact that so much of the imbalance of wealth, right, and how much concentrated wealth in these multi-billionaires that are living and so disconnected from a lot of people who are just struggling to get by. And if a place-based economy is one that could really narrow those things. And it's basically limiting ownership of vast amounts of land by a small number of entities, and not just land, of course, capital and technologies and all the things that make up the economy.
Right.
And saying, no, we're going to need to produce this regionally and locally. And this is going to, it's going to connect us to place, but it's also going to create so many more ownership opportunities,
Right.
so many more ways to have a share of the economy, shared prosperity. I don't know how you have shared prosperity in a global economy. I mean, there are certainly certain things that can be done at the federal level, but I feel like we can really not just build, not just from like the connection to place spiritually, socially, our well-being, but also like our financial security, our shared prosperity. And so to me, place can bring all those things together. And the island piece, I love it in the sense of the economic system parallel too, right? And how our lives are shaped by it. So just like a very quick thoughts I had about that.
Please.
And I say place, but also connection. It's like those two ideas, right? So there's concentric circle in an economic system that is truly place based, which I advocate for in the book and delineate in the book. Is one that goes from the hyperlocal to the regional, right?
Yeah.
And so there's these concentric circles or islands, right, of economics and how we live, that are they're about dependence, they're about interaction. So in my home here or in my apartment building, whatever it may be, I can have rooftop solar. I can have heat pumps, and these are is a whole other conversation. But those are technologies, and a lot of this is like technology is not going to help us. Those are technologies that connect us to nature in some really cool ways
Yeah.
as we think about it. But it's also like having we talked earlier about a garden, maybe a small garden, whether it's on my windowsill in my apartment or it's in my backyard. And then, there's a homesteading idea that was really one of the silver linings of the pandemic. It's like I'm
Right.
making my own bread, I'm jarring pickles and other
Yeah.
sort of things, right? So there's like that very place-based piece that you can do there. And then it goes out to the next island. And I think this parallels, right? Like the neighborhood,
Yeah.
where as in a place-based system, I'm walking, I'm doing local shopping, community gardens, community solar, libraries, parks, all those sort of things that create this system. And it's not, I say it's economic, but it's obviously social economic. But
Right.
think we need to flow our economic resources in these directions. That's, we know it, economics is what drives so much of everything. And then like at the city level, we can get, we get into like biking networks, we get into the Detroit urban farms and local manufacturing, local business districts. So it's like this, it's just the next level out. And then regional, which I really enjoy talking a lot about because it's that gets really into the bioregional and the more nature perspective, the parallels to watersheds. What we need in place-based systems are food sheds and energy sheds and making sheds and fiber sheds and that culture and nature interaction that can be so powerful. And these things, last thing I'll say is that these things are more possible than we've been led to believe. Okay,
Yeah, totally.
the existing sources of power will suggest these are ridiculous. There's no way you could do it. But there was a one study I love to share, and it's kind of fits right into this. It was in 2020. A group of like Cornell and Tufts researchers did this very exhaustive study of like the potential of agricultural productivity in 378 U.S. metro areas, and they found that basically half of them pretty much already had the existing land to produce all the food they need within a 155-mile radius. And then
Wow.
if you shift to more plant-based diets, you actually increase that.
Wow. Yeah.
And so things are possible, and we need to put those stories out there. I've kind of gone on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think the islands is a really helpful way to think through this.
That's great. And I appreciate it. And I know we're getting to end of time. So I want to thank you for playing with those and exploring. And I'm just really grateful for your work and the ways in which you're trying to invite us to dream differently, right? To create that different model in line with the Buckminster Fuller quote that you used that I was like, oh, that's such a good quote, right? It's like kind of need to dream that alternative model such the old one becomes obsolete, right? Like what I hear you dreaming is let's be better connected with each other, better connected with nature, and basically be guided by, caring and loving for each other. It's like
Mhm.
it seems like a pretty nice thing to be dreaming into existence. And so I'm grateful you're doing this work. So Matt, maybe as a final question that I tend to like to ask is just sort of what are three resources? Could be books, prayers, anything that you'd like to offer in this beyond, of course, your great book, which I would highly recommend and whatnot. But what other three references would you offer to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. So many great writers out there and podcasters like yourself. And I'm going to share ones that are in shorter form. They're not books
Great,
because
that's great.
I hope people actually read them or listen to them, I should say.
Perfect.
So someone on Substack I've come across who I can't, will not miss anything she writes. I've even watched her do a video. Her name is Rosie Spinks. And she has a Substack that's "What Do We Do Now That We Are Here?" The specific article I call your attention to actually came out right after Trump's election in November, and it was about how I became collapse aware. And it sounds dreary, but she talks about living in the two states, and it really resonated with me because I think for those of us who are dreaming like you as well, it's a struggle because the dream can feel very far from reality a lot of times. And so she says, living there is the current world, infinite growth, shareholder value. It's everything that's geared up around that. But here is like recognizing that like this world is actually collapsing, and that we see a need for systemic change, and that's kind of where we find the beauty and the hope. And I like to think of, I don't, we none of us control where everything's going, but she's talking about to me like planting seeds, leaning into that as much as you can, but not being hard on yourself and realizing that you have to be in the other world too. That is so much present in our lives. And then for podcasts, one I've come across recently, it's like a show, but one show in particular, one episode in particular. Tech can't save us, so
Mm.
certainly something that we need to be thinking about. It's by a Canadian, Paris Marks, and I don't honestly, I just really love this episode I heard. And what I loved about it was his critical assessment of tech, but in a balanced way, but also his perspective on the US. And just so I think it's really helpful for us, and I need to seek more of this myself. we getting perspectives outside of our country on these problems and what, in particular on U.S. corporations, I think is it could be super valuable to shifting our consciousness. And so this particular show is we need to, I think it was called, We Need to Cut Our Dependence on U.S. Tech. Here's how to start. NWT explores both systemic and personal aspects of that. It's very interesting, and I have a thirst for just learning more about that. The final one is another podcast called Green Dreamer, and it's specifically with a professor emeritus from Notre Dame named the guest on this podcast is Darcia Narvaez, and it's called Cultivating Nestedness. Um, or yeah, I think that was the general part of the title. And it's, for children and future generations. And it, to me, it was very eye opening in the sense of, as she talked about early childhood, and it's all about connecting to the nature that's in ourselves and in others. And she just tells the story, it beautifully flows into what's happening in the world, the problems that you and I have been discussing, but she's just very eloquent, and you can just feel the wisdom from all of her work over the years. So those are three I recommend.
That's great. I think it might be wrong, but an author, when I've heard her say it in an audiobook, it was Darsha Narvaez, and
Oh,
she wrote The Kinship Worldview. Is that the same person? Maybe, maybe not. I'll have to look that
yes,
up.
it's the
But this
same
is,
person.
yeah,
It's the
so
same
great
person.
indigenous wisdom. Wrote
Yes.
it in partnership with Yonakepe Tope, who is Four Arrows, and so yeah, no, I love that Darsha Narvaez came up in this conversation. That's awesome. Great,
Cool.
Matt. Well, this was super fun, and I'm really grateful for all of your work and the time. This has been just a real joy to have this conversation with you. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, Eric. I appreciate what you're doing and how you're framing things, and just nice to have this time to really chat with you in depth about it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. What a really rich and beautiful conversation that Matt and I just had. Matt's vision, right? It's simpler and more challenging than we probably expect. And what it really does is it reminds me of a quote I've recently heard from my friend Thomas McConkie from Thomas Merton. It goes something like this. People would rather live with manageable complexity than learn to live with unmanageable simplicity. I think in many ways that captures what Matt is inviting us into, right? Because at its core, Matt's message is really quite simple. It's beautiful. Connect to place. Recognize the native plants as easily as logos. Make nature part of your human culture. Develop a place-based identity. And so there's the simplicity of it. But why is it unmanageable? Well, you can't optimize it. You can't control it. You can't reduce it into some sort of five-step plan. It's asking us to be in relationship with land, with neighbors, with the more than human world. And honestly, just our current systems are not designed for this. They're designed for maximizing profit, efficiency, and growth that must keep on growing. And so, there with it is the paradox of our moment, right? The invitation is simple: connect to place. Living into that in our current reality is really hard. Really, really hard. And so it reminds me of another thing that a friend and colleague of mine, Kabir Khader, who's the lead of a nonprofit that I'm part of, the Open Field Awakening, which I've mentioned before, and this chrysalis metaphor that we've been using to understand our current moment, right? So a caterpillar, right? We all know this. A caterpillar goes into a chrysalis and then they become a butterfly, and that's beautiful, right? The key thing that I think we need to think about is that chrysalis moment, right? When a caterpillar goes into that chrysalis, they literally dissolve into protein soup before being reorganized as a butterfly. And there's all these imaginal cells that guide that protein soup to both break down and to be reimagined into something else. It seems like, I think I'm not the only one to sort of recognize, and we're not the only ones to recognize that's kind of a pretty good metaphor of where we are collectively, right? Our old systems are breaking down. And this was, of course, mentioned by one of the key references that Matt offered at the end, right? Rosie Spinks, right? That two worlds. So here it is, right? We're just saying it in a slightly different way, but it's getting at the same different words for the same kind of pattern that we're all seeing, right? The old system's breaking down. Many of us can feel it. We're in this protein soup phase. And it's really hard to see what's emerging. And particularly, many of us probably just feel like this is a time of chaos and loss, and everything that we love and care about is disappearing. The key part is to kind of tune into, okay, what does that mean to then be an imaginal cell, right? They're there in the protein soup. They're carrying the pattern of the butterfly. And the more and more I think that they're activated, the more imaginal cells are activating, the easier and easier it does for probably that pattern to start to emerge with others. It becomes a reinforcing feedback loop such that, the breakdown can end and the rebuild emerging can come into existence. For me, I think about Matt's work in that sense as basically he's activating the imaginal cells and doing his part of activating those imaginal cells, right? He shares these dramatic changes are possible. The story of Paris being transformed in a decade, or the really cool story of what's going on in Detroit with the black farmer collectives and this cultivation and movement towards food sovereignty of their vegetables and fruits, to half of the US metro areas actually being able to produce all of their food within a 155-mile radius and potentially more if we move towards a plant-based diet, right? Each one of these is tagging to the idea that these are not distant dreams. They are emerging realities. And beyond that, Matt's work is giving us a bit of a handle on how to be the imaginal cells, right? It's not just sitting into that unmanageable simplicity, which of course is the core invitation, but it's working how to manage through that complexity that we currently exist in, the breaking down of that caterpillar, right? So what did he give us? These four system change levers: shifting power, resetting culture, transforming land use, leveraging interconnected systems. They all work together, right? You can't just change land use without addressing some issues about power. You can't just shift culture without transforming the physical space, and so forth. This is the work of the imaginal cells within our chrysalis moment, right? It's difficult and necessary reorganizing. So the simple thing, ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to get us, I think one way to think about it is we're trying to get back to that unmanageable simplicity, connect to place. But doing that in our current moment is really hard, right? We spend too much time indoors and separated. Our economic systems are pushing us towards extraction rather than relationship. Our political systems are rewarding short-term thinking over long-term care. And our narratives are all about infinite growth and how they're not just possible, but actually necessary. And yet, when Matt talks about connecting to place, it resonates deeply. There's a hunger for this, a longing, right? And I shared my own personal examples of how I'm completely feeling this. And like it's something that I've been tapping into as well, right? I shared the work of working on and all my dreaming for kind of reimagining the hillside, which is currently filled with invasive species. Like, how could I re-indigenize that area, feeling a sense of, you know, commitment to this land because it is part of it, is where I connect to our great, beautiful Mother Earth, right? Or the Rose Canyon restoration, or how I have a weekly meditation to go visit the great oak on the other side of the canyons that I affectionately think of as Fangorn. These are grand gestures, right? They're just the ways in which I am showing up and trying to be in right relationship with this beautiful part of our beautiful living Mother Earth that happens to be holding me. This is the unmanageable simplicity of connecting to place. And with it, I can just tell you personally, it shifts something. It's not just what I do and what I know, but who I am, and even sort of dissolving a little bit of that notion of like the egoic I self and sort of really feeling how I am part of and connected with our great Mother Earth. And I also hope you can see that these are parallels that we've been playing around with, right? The beginning episodes of this was really, all about trying to basically, for those who have a strong scientific mind and really like feel a deep connection with, our objective ways of knowing, which I do too, right? As a scientist, right? I wanted to set up and say, these are pointing in a common direction as well, right? From the Life Breathes episodes, organizing from geoscience and physics, about understanding like the interconnected nature and the ways in which there's just constant exchange in the universe, to the way that islands shape, the way that from an ecology, how we are both islands that are shaping and being shaped by all of these nested interrelationships, to ultimately how we are beings that are adapting and connecting with each other. And for more details, listen to the prior episodes, right? But all of them, in my mind, the conclusion I was landing on is that all of them are drawing us towards a shift in what do we know as being good, towards living in right relationship. And that feels highly conciliant, right? It's different ways. Why? Because this is what indigenous wisdom has been telling us all along, right? Like we're just rediscovering what people have known for thousands of years, right? And we're just knowing and tapping back into that. And I think Matt is doing a beautiful job of doing his part as an imaginal cell, to play the metaphor into this, right? Emerging from all these different ways of knowing these different epistemologies. We're starting to find and re-anchor into perhaps a shared morality. Let's live in right relationship. And so with that, holding all of that, right? I just really love Matt's invitation. It's so concrete and simple. Connect to place, right? Live in right relationship. Sit in that unmanageable simplicity. And of course, it resonates with the work of Keith Bozzoli and the bioregional work that we talked about in a previous episode. And it's really inviting us to sort of be aware of not just our watersheds, but our food sheds and all the other sheds that Matt was playing with, right? And then last, of course, right, also like we were bringing in that those sort of two states that Rosie Spinks brought up that Matt brought into our conversation, right? The state one is basically the world of the infinite growth and the shareholder value and the way in which that's collapsing, right? To put it back into the metaphor I offered, that's the caterpillar, right? And then there's this state two, this imaginal cell, this chrysalis state, right? The protein soup, where we are literally sitting in the space of recognizing the collapse, but knowing as imaginal cells that we need to be planting the seeds for regeneration, the seeds for that future generation. And I hope you can then hear the seventh fire prophecy, right? Like our task as the seven flame people is not to actually step into the green grass. This is episode one, and from, of course, Robin Wall Kimmer and that lineage. It's not we're not necessarily the people that's going to be able to enjoy the green grass, but we're the ones that are responsible to allow future life to do so. And just to sit with that and know that, like that's what's being asked of us. Right? And so for me, I just really love Matt's advice. Lean into planting seeds as much as you can, while also remembering not to be too hard on yourself because you are part of the protein soup. We are the people that have to be living in both worlds right now. That's just the reality of being protein soup. It's just the cards that have been dealt, right? It's just like Gandalf sitting around with Frodo, and Frodo's like, "I wish the ring had never come to me," and Gandalf says, "So do all," who sing, but that's not for you to decide. All you can do is decide what to do with what's been given to you. We're the seventh fire peeper. We're the protein soup. We got to figure this out. So with this, that's what I'm picking up from this. I'm just so appreciative for Matt for kind of giving this and making it so beautiful, simplistic, and orienting, right? So, and with this, right, just to kind of end this out, right, the more of this pattern, the more we can hold this tension, the more that we can see the butterfly pattern and grow into it while allowing the caterpillar to be dissolved, the more others who will be able to see this, and the easier and easier this will start to be. So for you, just imagine this as an invitation to connect to your specific place. Learn your native plants, join restoration projects, support community gardens. Do what helps you connect to the people and place in the community, and in so doing, grow into your role as one of the many imaginal cells, that networking group that Matt ended with saying was the most critical. And for me, I would just say, and Matt and I both play with this, like this is not just civic, this is civic and spiritual, right? And of course, it's natural. So we're back to the civic, spiritual, and natural processes that tether us to reality are breaking down. Here it is, another way to say that, right? When we transform our streets, we are transforming our relationships. When we're reconnecting to place, we are rebuilding our democratic capacity. When we center and care, when we center in care and love, as we do systems change, we help to cultivate what matters most. So, with this, that unmanageably simple invitation from Matt, connect to place. Try it. Start somewhere. Start small if needed. Learn one native plant. Walk your neighborhood differently. Or, pulling in a conversation from Rob Dunn, pay attention to what your dog sniffs. They are connected to place in ways that you can't. They have sensory capacities. Listen to the more than human world. Build healthy relation. Let other living beings be your guide. Notice the watersheds and the other sheds that are feeding you. Join others in doing the work. And with this, we can all start to grow and nurture the people who have this network mindset, living the embodiment of this imaginal cell moment that we need. So, just in summary, the invitation is simple. Connect to place. The honest acknowledgement, the current systems make this hard. The hopeful truth: transformation is possible and happening, and you can be part of it. And the deeper wisdom: this is how we learn to live in right relationship. And that right relationship is the unmanageable simplicity that this moment is calling from us. So, with this, there are many resources that were offered. Please go to the Substack page, and particularly this episode, to get a link to Matt's book and his work, the work of Rosie Spinks, Paris Marks, the Green Dreamer podcast, Darsha Narvaez, and whatnot. With this, thank you for listening. Thank you, Matt, for the conversation and your amazing work. And thank you, listener, for being willing to see the butterfly as while we are in the protein soup, for being willing to connect with place even when it's hard, for growing into being the imaginal cell of this great transformation. May you deepen connection to the part of our living, breathing Mother Earth that is holding you right now and always will be holding you and all of us.